Well, are we sitting at the threshold of the end of what's been a very controversial petroleum subsidy regime in Nigeria?
Sorry, I didn't catch that question.
Are we sitting at the end of a possible, are we sitting at the threshold of the end to the petroleum subsidy regime in Nigeria?
Oh, yes, I think we may well be doing that. I think the end is nigh, if I may say. But there are political implications which would need to be sorted out by the government. But I think everybody, it's quite clear that this is not sustainable. The kind of subsidy that is being spent on petrol is not sustainable by the government. And they reckon they could do a lot more with that money. So give it a few months, who knows?
With that being the case, where do you see money then being redirected, and what would it spell for Sub-Saharan Africa's biggest energy industry in terms of its economic health?
I think in terms of where the money could be diverted to, there's quite a lot of things that could be used. The government came out recently, the Ministry of Finance came out recently and said something like, you could actually spend all of that subsidy that's been spent over the last 3 years, on generating 20,000 megawatts of power. Nigeria can only sustain about 3.7 thousand megawatts today. So you can just imagine the effect that such spend would have on the power sector. There's also building of roads, many thousands, or many tens of thousands of roads. There's the healthcare, there's the education that could benefit from such funds.
Well, certainly, the positives are there, but there are also negative repercussions to consider, Hakeem. I mean, the sudden removal of subsidies is likely to cause a spike in inflationary pressures and potentially jeopardize the administration's efforts to achieve single-digit inflation over the medium term. How do you see that filtering through?
Definitely, that would be the case. I mean, just imagine, petrol prices moving up from 65 to 100 naira today, or even 110 naira. Inflationary effect will be quite, significant. But I see that more as a short-term, repercussion than a long-term. And when you measure that against all the benefits that could happen as a result of deregulation, I think my opinion is that government should go for it.
Well, go for it all at once, because one of the opinions out there in the market is that they should be planning a more gradual approach to the subsidy reduction. Should we not see a possible scaling in of this approach?
That is wise, but if you look at the past history, I think since 2002, during the Obasanjo regime, we have been practicing some form of, sort of gradual deregulation. But these things tend to get bogged down in politics. Once you've effected one part of it, then what happens is that, you never reach the end of it, in which case you still continue with this partial deregulation, which clearly may not work for the system. Yes, there will be effects, there will be significant effects, but, long term, I think the industry and everybody else in the polity agreed that this is the best way forward.
At the same time, we've got a bill that's seeking to compel existing and prospective oil-producing companies in the country to commit themselves to a substantial portion of their investment to refineries, building them up. What do you see unfolding on that front in terms of development of refineries on the local front?
Well, this has been the case for some time, and I recall, I think sometime in 2005 when Mr. Obasanjo did bring this in and said that the oil companies should commit their production from Nigeria, about half of that production, to refining in Nigeria. But you see, you really can't force these things. Mm-hmm. If there is no deregulated market, if the economics of refining and selling petrol in Nigeria doesn't work, then you're not going to get any investors. There are about 18 refinery licenses which have been awarded for over 4 years. Nothing is happening today. So deregulation, I reckon, would bring in much needed investment in refining.
It's quite an interesting time in this space, for all of this to be unfolding, with China planning a pretty aggressive entry into Nigeria's oil sector. How do you see all of this changing the playing field when it comes to foreign investment in Nigeria's oil and gas space?
I think what would happen is that previously, I mean, for the last 50 years, we've had a restricted, number of entities practicing in the industry. I mean, we've had the IOCs, the usual suspects, the American and European companies. With China coming in with all this, all this deregulation and all this talk, the PIB, the Petroleum Industry Bill, coming in, we would see a wider playing field. We would see the Chinese coming in, and they are quite aggressive about acquiring reserves. I think it's good for the country. It's good for competition. It's also good for the government's pockets. So,
having said all of that, though, it's undeniable that these plans are politically sensitive and could provoke strikes. How do you see the broader Nigerian public receiving this?
It's not going to be well received, but what has been talked about, and I want to be careful about this, I think Labour, the unions have actually accepted that this deregulation should happen, but it's how it is put into effect. What they're asking for is that, look, you must provide transportation, you must provide increases in salaries if you are going to bring in deregulation. Another idea could well be, could you pass such savings? Could you pass, could you pass such savings to taxes so that people do feel the effect in their pocket of higher prices and then higher disposable incomes?
Well, on that note,
it's not going to be well received, but let's. I think the future is bright if proper policies are put in place.